Hi. Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you?
Oh, very well, thank you, thank you. No, it's a new thing for me doing Instagram Live. It's very exciting.
Right. Let's see if I
And
can get the level up here.
okay. I'm usually quite naturally loud, so but yeah.
Right. Okay.
Did I?
I
Am I
lost you there.
get
Just
me?
for something.
Okay, but
Yeah, let's go.
all right, cool. Well, before we get stuck into the questions from everyone, I just wanted to see how are you doing? How's lockdown treating you? You know, how are you getting by?
Well, I've been through the COVID experience. I've done the coughing, the fever, the
Oh,
muscle ache, and all the rest of it. And I've had a test, and I know that I have antibodies. So I think I'm quite lucky because I think a great advantage of having it is you don't have to worry about getting it. So
yes.
apart from that, I mean, I'm in this, I guess, you know, like everyone else, it's a very surreal and disorienting situation that makes one really reevaluate many things about humanly, many things, but also to do with work, about what's relevant, what stories can be told, how to tell them. Are cinemas ever going to open again?
Yeah.
Is the collective viewing experience, whether cinematic or theatrical, really over? You know, is streaming the way? You know, it's raised so many questions. In addition to all the, you know, the human questions about who's got it and in what ways, and who's taking care of other people and who are not, and so on. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that your latest film, The Road's Not Taken, which I believe is streaming in the States from yesterday, or streaming in the States now, but we hadn't got it over here yet. But it's interesting that that's about, you know, alternate paths you could have taken in your life. And I think a lot of people during lockdown had plans.
Yeah.
They thought their life was going to go a certain way, you know, during months or during the rest of this year, and they've changed. And I think that's something on a lot of people's minds. You know, that idea that actually I could be doing this, I could have been doing that. So I think that's an interesting idea for you to be exploring in a film at this time.
Well, yes, it's also about illness, the film, and about the difficulties and sacrifices somebody make when they are caring for somebody that they love that's sick, in this case mentally, neurologically ill, but also the love that goes with that. And I think that's in a way as appropriate, certainly, as the idea of possible lives, is the idea of, you know, how do we care for each other actually?
Yeah.
How do we love now under these conditions that have changed everything and are likely to continue to change everything for a long time?
Okay. Well, let's get stuck into the questions. We've got quite a few questions from the students and writers, from the scriptiste writers. So I'm going to start with Victoria, who is a producing student at the National Film and Television School. So she says, I first saw the tango lesson right after my very first trip to Buenos Aires to also learn the tango 10 years ago. The tango always appears very different to non-dancers watching than the sensation of actually dancing. But you really captured the subtleties that I haven't seen in film since. Do you have any advice or learnings from that experience of filming tango or filming partner dance in general that you could share?
Don't put yourself in the film, which is what I did. Oh God, the horrors. But yes, I put myself in the film because precisely for the reason she said, that I wanted to make a film about the experience of learning to dance, not the spectacle of looking at it. And dance in film is very difficult because the camera has to be as agile as the dancer, or you've got a static frame that's essentially a fourth wall in the theatre. So a cinematic relationship with dance, people often deal with that with lots and lots of fast cuts and things like that to get the best bits. but I wanted to look much more at the fragilities, the vulnerabilities, the confusions, and the meditative nature of partner dancing, actually.
Yeah.
Sort of, and also the politics of being, in my case, you know, a British woman who was exploring an Argentinian culture,
Yeah.
a cultural form that wasn't part of my own lineage at all, with all the that, which is a complicated thing to do. But yeah, so really, I guess the advice, what would the advice be? I suspect this question, I might either want to make a dance film. I'm used in these things, by the way, to seeing people's faces who are asking a question. And what I love doing usually is trying to decode what's really behind the question. Because questions usually are a statement in disguise, or somebody is expressing something that they're struggling with.
Yeah.
So maybe this person is, maybe Victoria is struggling with this conundrum about how you put something you love on the screen, not in an objectifying way, but in an experiential way. And I guess really the advice with that is about script, concentrating on script.
Yeah.
You know, what is the core of it, and from what point of view are you telling it? Because that immediately, if you're telling it from the point of view of experience, you're not necessarily putting the camera at a great distance and watching it like a show. Might be very close, or some other way of expressing the idea.
Yeah, yeah. Possibly. I'm afraid you're stuck with my face. Me asking the question.
It's very nice looking at your face. I'm liking looking at your face, but it's just that it's always really fascinating and revealing in these situations when one starts to dig around behind a question. So in fact, when people ask me a question, I often ask them a question back.
Right.
And that leads then to something more profound in the interaction, I guess.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, we'll do our best.
Yeah. I'll ask the next question is from another producing student called Shelley. That's the only name given, just the one name, Shelley. Yeah. So my question, she I think says, is around managing your focus in filmmaking. I know how well-rounded you are in your skill sets, and you have experience in many different roles, from production, also in front of the camera, and then also having a musical background. She points out, I have some similarities in this. I love many different roles of filmmaking, and also from a musical background. So I wanted to know your advice on how you best focused your time on each different role that you enjoy.
That's an interesting question, and the short answer is do one thing at a time, not everything at once. But really, I think with all aspects of work in film, as a director, as a writer-director, certainly, the need for a disciplined routine every day, a structure in which to develop, if you like, the muscles of thinking, of writing, of whatever, is the key. So it's never about, you know, flitting from one apparent inspiration to another, but rather being ready for if an idea comes, that one has the facility to be able to execute it. The same applies musically. Of course, all musicians know that it's all about practice and a great deal of repetition. Whether you're a classical musician, a jazz musician, or an improvising musician who never plays the same thing twice, it's about developing the facility, the flexibility, and so on. As a director of a film, you are, in any case, multitasking. You have to be able to understand the image. You have to have a feeling for composition, for light, for framing, for not just technically, but because you have to have a feeling for, well, what do you want to see, and how do you want to see it, and why? Then okay, there's that. Then you need to be aware of sound, the sound world, both during the shooting and then later in post-production, and creating the sound world. You know, you're creating a kind of, universe, you have to be able to deal with people and understand their fragilities, actors' fragilities in particular, and insecurities, and find a way of working with that, and so on. So what I'm saying is that in any case, you have to be able to move swiftly from one kind of role to another during the process as a whole, and of course during shooting, from technical to psychological to conceptual to script and so on. And you have to have that agility. So to keep practicing all of those aspects in a disciplined way every day, whether you feel like it or not, is a good plan.
Right, amazing. Sorry if I froze there for a little bit. I think the connection got a bit funny. I might have frozen at your end. I'm not sure, but persevere. So next question I have is actually from one of the script writers, and I apologize in advance for any mispronunciation of any name here. I'll do my best. So this is from actually each of these have a few questions, in fact, if that. So Elżbieta Benkowska, who's a writer director from Poland, and just to give a little information about her, received several awards and got an in for that, and is currently working on its debut Orunia Forever, for which she already received a special prize in the 2019 contest. So that's Elżbieta.
I've lost the sound.
Of working with them changed over the years.
Right, I lost half of that.
Am I back with you now? Can you hear me now?
Repeat the question.
So the question is, how do you work with actors? Has your way of working with them changed over the years?
Yes, okay. How do I work with actors? I spend a long time choosing who to work with, first of all. So casting, crucial process, crucial, nerve-wracking process, difficult, difficult for both sides. So I spend a lot of time choosing, first of all, and then once chosen, I go in a way into a state of as deep a commitment as I can make to that actor in the role and where we're trying to go, in time, in space, and in quality of interaction. So I try and have as much preparation as possible before the shoot, because once we come to the shoot, it's too late in a sense. One can then improvise and things happen, but you earn the ability to be free in a way with your last minute decisions by a great deal of slow preparation, kind of slow cooking, really. So I get as much time as I can spend with an actor, I will spend, and we'll talk about the script, and we'll talk about them, and we'll talk about how they feel and what it means, and what's preoccupying them, what difficulties they foresee, all these things. So it's one-on-one. So, and this is a way of building up a relationship, building a feeling of trust, and getting also a great deal of information, because I will be watching the actor while I'm with them, having an apparent casual conversation, noticing how they respond to different things. Some people love to go into a very analytical discussion. Some people just glaze over. So it's good to notice that. Some people respond to touch. That would be difficult now, of course, under current circumstances. Some people respond to jokes or you know, whatever. But it's all incredibly vital research. And then I guess that I try and be as compassionate as possible, because I know that most actors are insecure in the moment. They're taking a risk. They're no more insecure than the average person, but the average person doesn't have to expose themselves that much. It's very, very exposing to be in front of a camera. And most actors that I've talked to in some depth about this have a fear of failure, a fear of kind of falling, if you like, into the void of possibility. So I try and hold them in my gaze and with a kind of clear framework, a clear kind of structure of attention, and then see what happens. And it's incredibly individual. So the short answer to the question is whatever works, whatever helps it work with the actor and arrive at something that goes beyond their normal limits. And that's in an individual matter. So it's about close observation.
Right. And has it changed over the years? Do you know if you kind of settled on different approaches changed depending on the kind of actors you work with? It could be.
I don't. Yeah, I've probably changed. I've probably become more aware of, you know, things that can go wrong or difficulties, and can preempt them and things like that. And possibly in the early days, I wasn't quite so aware maybe of the particular kind of attention that an actor might need, and I've become more aware of that. But as I say, it's so individual. Have I changed? Well, I hope I've got better. You know, I don't know. It's you know, experience kind of adds up. And yeah, I think I manage time better probably with actors. And if I ever was nervous in a room with an actor, which many directors are actually terrified of work with the actors and do almost anything to avoid it. You know, just get on the set and say, "Oh, it's all going to kind of come together." But I try not to be. If I notice myself being nervous, I try, so to speak, put that on one side and be there, being attentive and observational. Relating.
Right. Okay. Elzbieta also asks, how do you feel when you're in the editor's room watching the first version of your film?
Well, of course, I'm a director who's in the editing room all the time. There's no pre-edit. I'm in there from day one. So the first version is not a surprise for me, therefore. The first version is a version that I've sweated over with the editor for months already. But how do I feel? Depends if it's working or not. You know, I sometimes feel, oh my God, I've been working on something completely different than I thought I was working on.
Yeah.
I'm usually very, very over aware of the things that aren't working. You know, the nature of editing is it's a critical analytical process. So you're not sitting there going, oh my God, that is fantastic what I did. I mean, occasionally maybe, but mostly you're going, oh shit, that isn't, wait a minute, what can we do here to make this work? Or can we find another take for this? Or, you know, whatever. It's a sort of sculpting, sort of lovingly critical shaping of material, or finding of material that's buried in it. I mean, I'm often surprised by two things. One is either that it has gone full circle back to the very original, like one line or one paragraph concept that maybe was years ago, and I kind of forgot along the way as it developed and changed and this and that, or the contrary, that I realize it's gone a very, very long way away from the original concept, which isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. It's just that it has turned into something else.
Can you give an example of each from your films then? Which one turned out exactly as you originally conceived it, and which one was vastly different?
But back to the first concept, you mean? I would say that Orlando was very, very close to the first concept. On the other hand, I spent 7 years working on it before I actually filmed it.
Yeah.
So that kind of first principle took a hell of a lot of refining, researching, heartache, bankruptcy, and all the rest of it to arrive at the final thing. But the way I shot it, it just so happened I shot it under certain conditions that meant there were no choices in the cutting room. There was essentially, it was done as one take, a scene, or, you know, I knew exactly what the in and out point. There was no coverage. There was no like, oh, well, let's do a long shot and a medium shot and a close up or anything. No, this is how we're looking at this image. So that made it, in a sense, unsurprising in the cutting room. Although I learned a great deal from working with Hervé Jeanette, who was the editor, who was, my God, you know, scissors out, only leave in the necessary, you know, don't indulge, you know, the more beautiful the shot, the shorter it should be, you know, this kind of thing was the sort of principle. So leave people wanting, don't allow people to become bored, don't indulge. So that was great. Another film, let me see now. Well, actually, the one I've just made has The Road's Not Taken, ended up in a very, very, again, a long writing process, but it ended up very different than its original premise for a combination of reasons. It's the way it needed to go.
Interesting. Oh, well, we'll have to see it, and then we can discuss that one. Okay. Well, okay. The next question I have comes from, so this is from Vlastimir Sudar. He is a writer, director, and producer born in Sarajevo, but studied at Central St Martin's College in London, and has a PhD in film studies from the University of St Andrews in Scotland, and completed his first feature-length fiction film, Granny's Kiss, which I hope I get that right, with a colleague in 2018, which has screened at 30 festivals since, winning 13 awards. That's for Vlastimir. This is his question. Very specific one, actually. I like it. Do you think your short film, The London Story, is as timely as ever? And is it now the right time for you to remake it as a feature, as an urgent outcry about contemporary British global politics, all together with the dancing scenes?
Well, that's a very nice and very specific question, and I'm sure that quite a lot of people watching this will not have seen The London Story, but I made it before I made Orlando, actually. Was it Vladimir, the name of the questioner?
Vlastimir.
Okay. In fact, I originally conceived it as a trilogy. So I wrote The London Story, the Berlin Story, and the New York Story, and because the premise of the whole thing was the relationship, Britain's identity, and is it part of Europe, or are we subservient to America, and where does surveillance fit into all that? Those were the themes of it, but it was done as a kind of, I thought of it as a mini Technicolor musical, as a way of dealing with those big political themes. It's funny. But I could never raise, although people really liked the film and responded to it a lot, I could never raise the money for the other two parts of the trilogy, unfortunately. It was turned down, and I didn't persist. So in the end, so as for it becoming a feature, I'm not sure it should or could become a feature exactly, but I think these themes about national identity, Europe and America, obviously around Brexit, you know, the Brexit themes, these are perpetual themes in certainly in recent British history and European history, indeed. Nationalism, the rise of nationalism, the rise of surveillance culture, and the dominance of the United States. And it keeps cropping up in my films. So the film that I'm hoping to make next deals, in fact, with these themes. It's not at all like The London Story, and it doesn't have any dancing in it. Sorry, but the themes are there, and I think, you know, wrestling with those kind of themes is a very interesting and difficult thing to do. But people often are under the illusion that these bigger themes are not personal. It's not true. They're deeply personal, and people's relationship with the land they supposedly are from, and their relationship with borders and alliances, and the strange business. I find it strange anyway. The strange business of patriotism and national identity, given that we all actually share the surface of the same earth. It's a subject of great interest. The other part of it, the comedic part and the dancing part, and the people who were in this film dancing very minimally, I have to say, and very funnily, the great Lol Coxhill musician, sadly now deceased, and George Yasumi dancing together as a pair. You know, I had a dance training in my early 20s, and there's a phrase, once a dancer, always a dancer. But also, Henri Bazin, the great film theorist, said, you know, the essence of cinema is movement. And I think that when you have a background of exploring movement, there's a kind of hunger. There's a hunger to move. There's a hunger to move through time, through space, across the frame. You know, these kind of this sort of choreographic gestures are part of the director's toolkit, actually. So you can call it, in that sense, everything's a dance on film. It's just some are a bit more minimal than others, you know.
Well, it's interesting he uses the Vladimir uses a phrase like an cry. Do you ever see yourself making a movie that would be so overt, you know, trying to make a point as opposed to, you know, keeping it lower down, mix, if you
trying
like.
To make a point. Well, the issue is always the trap of didacticism and polemic on film. You know, if people feel they're being lectured to, that there's a message, you know, take this message and agree with it or not, it's not necessarily useful if you're working with fiction. If you're making a documentary and you specifically need to say something in a very particular way and communicate it clearly, that's another matter. But fiction tends to work on best on the subterranean levels, on complexity, on ambiguity, on contradiction, on this strange baggage that we carry around inside ourselves, and the kind of the chaos and the order of the mind and so on. So sort of a message film from that point of view can be contraindicated in fiction. But there are always how can I put it, hidden not exactly messages, but hidden or overt intentions. You know, it's a medium of communication. You're trying to say something, but you're not trying to necessarily say a message in a box, you know. But you're not just, it's not the vague stuff that's necessarily interesting, but ambiguous can be interesting because it resonates with how we experience things, which is complex.
Yeah, cool. So on to the next question from, this is from
I've lost you in a way, sound-wise.
Ministry of Love, Life of a Gentle Coward, and Trisata, and has made a feature document, Occupation. His first question about Ginger and Rosa. He states most no master shots used in Ginger and Rosa. Did you shoot any and not use them later?
I don't believe in master shots, really. Apart from the word, which is a bit sort of dominant, isn't it? It implies that there's a sort of a big thing that's more important than the small things. No, Robbie Ryan, who this was the first time I'd worked with Robbie Ryan, and when we talked about how to shoot the film, it was all about point of view, and it was all going to be shot from the, not necessarily the literal point of view of Ginger, but from the emotional point of view of Ginger, one of those two characters. We were going to be in her world. So to step back and do a so-called master shot would have been not right as that way of telling the story, and we pretty much stuck to that through the shooting. And sometimes that can feel very risky because you're going against a kind of orthodoxy of coverage, but at the same time what you end up with is that you have to really, you can't take any shot for granted. You have to kind of search for the shot that's going to express what needs to be expressed in the scene, and search for that. And we were also shooting fast and almost exclusively handheld, not entirely. There were some formal shots, and I gravitated towards certain lenses that were very intimate, not always close, but had a quality of intimacy to them. So yeah, any kind of rules about how one should shoot a scene were not possible in the time, in the priorities that I wanted to set the time, which was, for example, I would rather do a lot of takes in one way and get an incredible performance eventually than get lots and lots of angles and miss the performance. So that was my priority: intimacy and performance in storytelling, and a singular point of view.
Oh, okay. Pavo also says that you've worked with some brilliant but very different cinematographers. For instance, Robbie Wright, Sasha Vierney. How do you choose them, and why?
Okay, so yes, Alexei Rodionov I've worked with 3 times, Robbie twice, and indeed many others. So Robbie Muller, I mean, great cinematographers. Listen, I'm a fan of these cinematographers, and I study their work a great deal. And when I see somebody who's got an eye that is doing something extraordinary, or has a feeling for light in a certain way, I try and get to work with them, you know. And then if I can work with them again, if it's all worked out, then that's absolutely great. People's schedules are often complicated, so it's not always possible to work again with certain people. But I think the choice for me is, again, it's about cinematographers who don't, how can I put it, who don't impose a style and are not necessarily trying to do something, in quotes, beautiful, but who are trying to do something true. It was very revelatory for me when I first worked with Alexei Rodionov, and as I say, I worked twice subsequently with him so far.
Yeah.
And he came from working with me was the first time he'd worked in the West. He'd worked exclusively in Russia before that, notably with Ellen Klimov, you know, the most extraordinary Russian director. In particular, his war film, anti-war film, Come and See, you know, is quite amazing. Yeah. But his way of working in the Russian school at that time was to work very, very deeply on the script. You know, what is this scene for? You know, Sally, why are we doing this? You know, and so on. And so it was a really kind of dissecting passion, you know. And we were basically glued to each other, you know, shoulder to shoulder, until we had the same film in our heads. And we shared absolutely feeling for composition and so on. So, you know, it's all those kind of reasons, and it's an absolutely crucial collaboration, of course, in the filmmaking process. Crucial.
Yeah.
The cinematographer becomes your eyes, you know. So if you're not seeing the same thing, you're in trouble. But if you do, they'll surprise you, finding things for you that might help you to see things in a different way, and it can be quite magical.
Amazing. His other question. European budgets.
Yes, I missed the first part of the question. You are breaking up quite a lot sound-wise, I'm afraid. So can you repeat it for me?
Yeah, I think it's both ways as well. You've been breaking up a little bit for me, but budgets.
Oh, well, you know, I send them a script. We meet for coffee or something and talk. You know, if they like it and they like me and I like them, and they're like, it happens. And then, of course, it's, you know, complicated. But I've done quite a few films where all the actors, and in some cases all the crew, and indeed myself as well, are paid absolutely the same rate, daily rate.
Yeah.
This is a great equalizer, and it serves everybody well, because the very experienced people have the satisfaction of knowing that they've done something for love, if you like, for love, and because they really want to do it, and that they're not, and the less experienced people feel valued, that they're not kind of lesser individuals with smaller fees or something. So it creates a very good feeling, and of course it makes it possible to make the film. And in fact, many of the films that I've done with Christopher Shepherd producing have been about how on earth are we going to make this film for this money, because you know it gets budgeted at the budget, first of all, that it should be, in quotes, let's say $12 million, and the first even possibility looks as if it's going to be $1 million, you know, so, and maybe it ends up somewhere in between, or a quarter, but often half of a half of a half of a half of what you thought it was going to be. But I have an absolutely clear philosophy about this, which is you make the film for what you have, and the skill is adjusting to the realities of what you have, and not always thinking, oh, if I had a bit more money, I could have a crane or something like that. So, you know, it's like junk the toys that are expensive. Unfortunately, what also gets cut is time. So, you know, the length of shoots that I've done have got shorter. So, you know, early days, like 12 weeks, 10 weeks, my God, luxury. The party, the last one, was 2 weeks, you know. These things go down in time. So learning to manage time, the alchemy of time and decision making and so on. But most importantly, just deciding to do it anyway, with eventually whatever money one can raise, and trying to get people on board who will work in that spirit. And that, of course, that includes actors who on other films might be being paid a great deal more. It also often involves, you know, oneself taking deferments and or not being paid and all that. But in the end, the treasure, if you like, is just making the film at all.
Yeah, cool. So the next question is scriptees tradition. At every meeting, one always asks this question, apparently. So they want to ask it to you. If you could choose just one thing based on which you'd have to pick project from now on, what would it be? Story, writer, producer, or cast?
Well, given that I'm the writer and I do the story, that leaves producer and cast, does it? These hypothetical questions are very strange, because in reality, of course, you need all of those things. You need all of those roles, and you can't make a film without somebody in the producer role, you know, where that could be oneself. And, you know, my early days when I started filmmaking, I did everything. I produced it, directed it for no money, and shot it and blah, blah. But you still have those different roles at different times. And films, you know, absolutely must have a producer who's holding and thinking about the structure, the financing, the organization, how to make it all happen, the enabler, if you like. The writing, it seems to me, always is the starting point, is the hidden architecture. And from a point of view of all the jobs that one does on a film, writing is without doubt the heavy lifting. Compared to which shooting is like going out dancing all night under warfare conditions. No. Somebody, Kubrick it was, who said that you're trying to do your best whilst on a switchback ride in the middle of a war or something like that. But the writing is the considered. It's the basis of everything. And I'm not talking about dialogue, that's part of the writing. I'm talking about the concept, the idea, the images. The images are written. You know, you describe in the script what people are eventually going to see and what they're going to feel. So I think writing is the starting point, is the most fundamental, and it's often misunderstood what a script consists of. It's nothing about putting in close up track here, or, you know, we see such and such or anything like that. It's more like evoking something, and incredibly important, doing a phenomenal amount of work on structure. Because if you kind of make it all literary and nice and it all appears nice, the bits you fudged, the holes in it, will show. That it'll come up during the shoot because you can't make the scene work, you know, you're suddenly stymied. And worse, it will come, because you can still do something about it then if you've got your wits about you, but in the cutting room it will come up and it will kill you because there's nothing much you can do about it anymore. So the writer's job is to, in a way, is to structure, is to build, is to explore, is to analyze, is to shake it about and turn it upside down and expose its flaws and understand what it is. And then that becomes actually a quite technical document that a relatively slim number, 100 pages, say, that represents hundreds and thousands of discarded pages. So yeah, so let's say it's the starting point, but without the producer and the actors, the people you're actually going to look at who are going to embody it, and without the director, of course, going to drive it all and make it all happen, and is the only one who's got all the information in his or her head. There isn't a film at all. You know, film is collaborative, so to try and choose one or the other is a non-starter.
Fair enough. I assume it's you know, it's that exercise, isn't it? It's kind of like, you know, if someone held a gun to your head and you had to choose between this, that, and the other, what would you choose? I guess that's that kind of thing, I suppose, is the spirit of the question.
But I think the real question is, how do you choose what film to make?
Yeah.
How do you choose what's worth doing? You know, where do you put your life energies? Because a film, in my experience, if you're a writer director anyway, it's a 3 to 4 year process, commitment. You know, you're giving a huge chunk of your life to this thing, so you'd better have some feeling of certainty that it's a journey worth embarking on.
Yeah. And how do you choose?
What?
How do you choose? How do you choose?
How do I choose?
How do you know? You know.
Well, one of the things that I do is I work, when I'm writing, I usually work on several ideas in parallel, so that I've got something to choose from. So I'm not just sort of sinking everything into one thing, and it allows me to step away and get a little bit of distance and detachment on the idea, on the various ideas, whatever they may happen to be. And then I guess it's an intuitive leap in the end. It's like, actually, no, what it is I choose the film that I feel I will kind of die if I don't make this film. You know, it has to be that much longing attached to it. And that's something one knows in one's gut, you know. And not just your gut. You sort of know it all over your body, really, because it's visceral, and it's also, it's a feeling of necessity. So for example, therefore I've never made a film, let's say, as a career move. You know, this would be good for my CV or something like that. That's never happened because I could never find enough energy in that way of thinking that would propel me through the, you know, sort of excruciating level of commitment that a film takes.
You're right. Fair enough. Okay, well, I've got some questions actually from the head of studies at Scripties, Christian Ralph, as well. One of them actually, again, relates to writing, the writing process. He wonders if you have a fixed routine for writing, or you just work when you feel like it.
Fixed routine. The
Right.
work when you feel like it method, I think I did that through my 20s. And that meant, you know, like 36-hour marathon sessions of tortured whatever, and then having a big sleep, looking at it and going, oh my God, garbage. So I think the fixed routine is everything, really, when it comes to writing. I remember at a certain point I decided to look up all my favorite writers and find out what their routine was, or if they had one. And they all, without exception, wrote in the morning. Some went on to continue during the afternoon, but all of them got up and got on with it. And whether they felt like it or not, whether they had a good idea or not, whether they thought what they were doing was trash or brilliant or whatever, was absolutely irrelevant. That it was just about getting a certain number of words out that day, or just sitting there, just sitting at the desk. I usually try, when I'm working on a script, I usually have these little kind of rules for myself, like I'll write a list first thing in the morning about what I want to try and achieve that day, and then I look at that list at the end of the day and cross certain things off, and then make a follow-up list for the next day. And I try and generate a certain number of words, even if the words are, I don't know what this is about. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
You know, these are sort of confessional stuff, just to get going. And in the process of getting going, I start to find out things. But more importantly, I have then the you know, just the writing facility, because I'm doing it every day. And if I don't, I lose it.
Yeah. Now, I think we've got just about just over 5 to 10 minutes left. So we'll sort of move on to the final questions. But I don't know if there are any coming, any questions coming from the comments, possibly. There we go. There might be some of the comments, but we'll see what comes. In the meantime, Christian also asked, have you ever been tempted to work in Hollywood? I'm sure there must have been offers after Orlando.
Yes, there were offers, but they were not. They didn't fill me with longing. It was actually quite a crisis for me after Orlando. I was very confused by the attention from America, and I got a couple of offers of things that basically seemed to be Orlando in disguise. You know, they always seem to have a sex change in them or something, and I felt, oh God, I'm going to be asked to repeat what I've already done, but in a less interesting way, or whatever.
Yeah.
But of course, there's a mythology about Hollywood that is well. When I go to Los Angeles, I often have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it's kind of extraordinary to be in a place that's dedicated to the medium, and on the other hand, it's full of tension and money and making things for reasons that don't seem to resemble the reasons that I work for at all. So I feel like an alien from outer space, really, when I'm there. But the scale, that's what's, I think, very tempting, is the idea of just working with the medium at its biggest, and I don't necessarily mean big sets and all that, but I mean with the biggest reach. But so many of my favorite films in the history of cinema have, at least at the beginning, had sometimes a quite small reach, but a very big effect. So there you are. That's the answer.
Thank you. Well, we just had some questions come in, so yeah. I'm sorry, I haven't quite. They move up, so I didn't quite catch the names of the people asking. So apologies.
Right.
One was asking for advice for a film which is set in a single location.
In a single location.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I did. So, I explored this with The Party, which I wrote deliberately to be a single location film, in fact, although it was a set. I don't know if this is a lockdown-based question about somebody who's wanting to write something that they can do now in a single location. I think it's a wonderful restraint to work with, and what I found I wanted to do when I worked in a single location was see all the variants and possibilities of how to shoot within it. Static, moving through, around, all those things. But I've also done monologue film, Rage, which just had people against a plain background, so you can't get much more singular than that. The only thing that changed in the background was the color. I think, again, there's something about constraint that can be amazingly energizing. You know, when the possibilities are endless and so on, what do you begin to choose? When you create a framework that is simpler and in a way tougher, your imagination has to go into a kind of a different gear, which is quite wonderful. So I would say if you're thinking of doing it, the single location, welcome it, and instead of going wide, go deep.
Right. Amazing. So.
Oh, I saw it is not a lockdown question. It says pop up on the screen. Right.
How was it?
I'm sorry, I've lost the sound.
Lockdown question, tongue sticking. Has it? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Am I coming
Yes, I
through?
can hear you now.
Amazing. Has it affected creativity in a positive or negative way? You know, has it sparked ideas, for example?
What has affected my creativity?
The lockdown, being in the lockdown.
Oh, has the lockdown affected? No, well, no, having the virus affected my creativity. I can assure you of that. It made me want to lie down, basically. But I think what I feel is that the lockdown is making me take stock and think about priorities and think about next steps. It's made me reflect on mortality, because I've lost somebody very dear to me to the virus. It very quickly was snatched away. And I think that, so yes, it's affected me in the sense of we never know how much time we have, and we've got to use it well.
Fine. And I think we could squeeze in one more question. So someone has asked, what have you found most surprising about your life in film?
I think it's quite surprising how long film takes to make, and how long it endures afterwards in people's imagination. A film exists in time when you experience it, obviously on the screen, but it exists in time in another sense, which is, you know, decades. And I don't think I fully understood that when I started making films. I had a much more of a feeling of the moment, of the present moment, transitory, but not about in the enduring quality of film. I saw a question on the screen, what do I absolutely hate about filmmaking? So I'll answer that. The only thing that I find that I kind of don't exactly hate, but is very uncomfortable, is when the film comes out, the whole process of it coming out, really, the press junkets, the going, the publicity, the having the hair and makeup. Actually, if I had to pull out one thing, it would probably be that. This sudden, you know, when you've spent your life as a director looking at, you know, your eyes, you're never looking at yourself. And so suddenly this kind of reversal of attention, having to sort of perform being a director at the moment when you're very vulnerable, because you're putting out this thing that you've put so much care, passion, love and struggles out into the world, into what can often be a quite cruel critical gaze or an indifferent one. So I think that moment, I don't hate it, but I find it a trial. Pretty much everything.
Hopefully this was hopefully this was a little nicer than that. This wasn't such a trial as doing.
This is not a trial at all. This is not a trial. First of all, I'm not presenting a film. I'm interacting with questions, with your questions and with the questions from these strangers whose faces I wish I could see. But
yeah.
no, this is not a trial at all. I really love that. I've always loved Q&As. Not all directors do, but I've always loved it. It's fascinating what people ask and how they respond. And there's something, yeah, no, that's terrific. I'm talking about red carpets.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, the messages of thanks are already coming through, and we've not wrap it up there. I mean, Sally, honestly, thank you so much. That's fascinating. And from Script East for your questions. You've given us plenty to talk about. Technology, but great. Thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Take care. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.